Before we get into the details of different types of research methodologies and how you read the literature, but maybe it'd be good for the viewer, for those who are taking this class, to say what are a few of the high points in the history how environmental justice has evolved. Just maybe just a few from 1987 to 92, whatever.
Whatever, right. And I'm going to refer to the actual years here so that I don't mislead you on the actual years. But the attention towards environmental justice sort of began in 1978 with the problems in Warren County, North Carolina, where PCBs were sprayed illegally. And then there was an effort to move these to a location in Alabama, and there were community members and some legislators had a big protest, and there were rioting and there were arrests, and it really showed that there was something is amiss, there's a big problem. It called attention to the injustices and the overburden aspect of these people, and being cited and with these PCBs without any kind of oversight at all. So that was in '78. And then the government did a little study in 1983. The General Accounting Office, the GAO, did. What they discovered was that 3/4 of the hazardous waste sites were in African American communities. So this highlighted the fact that there is environmental injustice going on. Then in 1980, there were some researchers working at this point on looking at the problem. And in 1987, the United Church of Christ report came out on toxic waste and race, which showed that the minorities were overburdened, and there was an income part of this deal as well. Then in 1990 came the Michigan Conference. This is one that was led by Dr. Bryan about race and the incidence of environmental hazards, and came out with a book. I don't have my prop. I have the book in the car on race and incidence of environmental hazards, edited by Bryan and Paul Mohai from the University of Michigan. Also, that it was a compilation of the different studies and thoughts that were presented at that conference, which really showed that there was environmental injustice was rampant. Then in the work of this group and related brethren in 1994 led to the Clinton signing the Executive Order number 12898, which was dealt with federal actions to address environmental justice in minority populations and low-income populations. What that led to, which was really rather significant, that environmental impact statements that anyone looking for renewal of permits or obtaining permits to build some kind of an industry or whatever had to include an environmental justice component and do an environmental justice analysis. Now, on paper, that was a wonderful thing to happen, but we did, one year we did a little study of environmental impact statements to see what was going on in the environmental justice components, and very weak results. And for the Detroit area, for example, the one that some of our students at the School of Natural Resources and Environment were really involved with was the DIF, the Detroit Intermodal Freight Transfer. There was an environmental justice component that the developers had done, and the students did a new one and showed very different results from what the developers were showing. So anyway, so that was a landmark, though, having that executive order written and having it in the regs that environmental justice needed to be addressed by any federal organization. Then the next thing that happens is, back in 1987, the United Church of Christ report on toxic waste and race came out. Well, Paul Mohai and Robert Bullard and Beverly Wright did a new analysis of data over the next 20 years.
These are all these are all really leading
Yeah.
people, researchers.
Bullard is in, I think he was in Texas. He may still be there. Beverly Wright is in Missouri, I believe, and Paul Mohai is in University of Michigan. Well, anyway, those were the three main authors and researchers on this particular thing. So they looked at the same situation, looking at toxic waste and race. And the name of their report is Toxic Waste and Race at 20. It was an update of the UCC 1987 report. And their conclusions were the problems are still there, if not worse.
Environmental justice isn't just with people, the African Americans. I mean, it doesn't extend to a lot of different areas. Like you look with like Native Americans and and reservations and uranium, and I mean, there's places all over the country, indeed all over the world, where these are issues, or maybe the shipping over to places in Africa where people are being hazardous materials being dumped in, there. So it's kind of universal struggle, is it not?
Send our mercury-laden chips.
There's before we go into some of your research, I think it's just a context. What would you say, there's different forms of ways of approaching research, especially environmental justice and social science. One is, and before we get to your strength, but let's talk a little bit about participant observation. When a person does a participant observation study, what does a researcher do in a community? For instance, if they're a community like this, what might they do?
Yeah, well, you immerse yourself within that community and leave your own prejudices and thoughts beforehand home, because you want to be seeing with fresh eyes and not be blinded by your own biases and stereotypes, which is a very possible situation in participant observation. But the participant observers, I guess one of the this is not environmental justice, but Margaret Mead and her immersing herself into the Samoan culture was a good example of it. This is becoming part of the culture that you're working with, and careful observing. The thing is that participant observers generally are using what we call qualitative methods.
Right.
So they're observing, taking notes, recording, filming. They can do that these days. And then analyzing all of those notes later on. Sometimes they'll have maybe a little structured interview that they will do with people, but generally they're just trying to let the culture that's being studied provide in a natural setting the information, and the participant observer researcher is in that and wants to be accepted. And the phrase that the government uses for this is to be culturally competent.
Well, then one advantage of participant observation approach is that you do get a lot of a richer story like that you can immerse into that world that is descriptive, has the power of storytelling which comes with it. Now there's another form of ways that environment, which is your strength, and to the degree that I've been involved, is the approach is more of a macro approach, and that's using the methods we call like statistical analysis, survey research, using what you did there, secondary data, now using geographic information systems, using geographic spatial data or systems to try to look at the impacts and the changes. The other thing I want to say is that I think that also enables us now not just to look at one we call variable, one impact, but you can look at a multiplicity of impacts, of environmental impacts, or multiplicity of different income and different racial forms, and then also how they interact together, and then the impacts now, which is the story one, is what's the impact on people's health and their livelihood and their life chances.
Yes, and that's what we'll get to when I'm talking about my data.
So
but the other kinds, one of the problems with the participant observation and community-based research, for example, too, is that there may be biases and non-objectivity or subjectivity going on. And so with the statistical analysis, we try to be objective. And statistics are really a tool. But oftentimes the data that come in from participant observers and from community-based researchers, all this qualitative information and the richness of the stories, get culled down into what we might call a sound bite. Is how many times was such and such mentioned, or how many times did we observe this, or what was observed only once that could have been a very important factor. But that's really is a statistic, counting frequencies. That is. But the kind of research that I spoke about earlier when I was working with Dr. Bryant when we first got back together again back in the late 80s was secondary research. We were using data that already existed and pulling it together. The advantage that we had there was that I had full access to, back then, rather strong computational facilities at the University of Michigan using the mainframe computer there. And then again at Wayne State using its mainframe. Now we've got more power on our little desktop computers than we had back then. But this was kind of a breakthrough. And what we were doing with our secondary data, taking the census data, taking the data that we had were retrieving from the Department of Environmental Quality and from the EPA, correlating using the zip code as our cases, as our unit of analysis, correlating the percentage minority in the zip code and the median household income in the zip code, and correlating the two things together with the incidence of the polluters, of the bads. And one of the things that we found in the state of Michigan that was almost always, no matter how we split up the pie or which kind of bad we were working with, was that race was the more important predictor of the than was income. But that was using secondary sources. Another kind of research that I'm involved in right now is basically, we might call it field research, because I have people in the study. The kind of research that we really can't do is experimental, though we can do some quasi-experimental studies. What I mean by a quasi-experimental study is that we're using the factors that be and looking at the outcomes. Like if something is going to be cited, what was it like before, what is it like afterwards? But we're still basically using either secondary data. But sometimes what we will use too in these kinds of studies is a survey research, where we do interviewing with a preordained set of questions to find out from a sample what the situation is in the population. Now, Paul Mohai and Bunyan Bryant from the SNARE, the School of Natural Resources and Environment at Michigan, were involved in the Detroit area study about 20 years ago that was allowed to have an environmental justice component. And so they were using randomly sampled respondents, both blacks and whites. They were able to look at how people felt about the environment. And one of the things that was out there in the literature was that, the blacks don't care. And the Detroit area study environmental justice component found out, yes, indeed, they really do care, as it was done. When you're doing a survey research, the idea there is to get what we call a random sample from the population, not a biased sample. And this was a very carefully drawn random sample from the Institute for Social Research at U of M.